I wanted to begin this meeting like I begin any other by thanking you so much, Brian, for taking the time out of your day to join me today. And without further ado, I will just start this interview like I start any other by saying, who is Brian Knox?
Well, first of all, Aaron, thank you for having me on. I appreciate that, and it's a real honor for me. It's been a long time, so wow, who is Brian Knox? Brian Knox is a pretty ordinary guy, really, but I have a story, probably not unlike other people's. I think some other people. I was born in Connecticut, in the United States. I presently live in Medellin, Colombia, which is part of my story, how I got here. But um, I was raised in a blue collar family. My dad worked, my mom stayed home. So we always had her around. My mom was a very accomplished pianist, and that was one of the things that I took from my childhood as very positive, is the love that she instilled in me for music and also for literature. Um, but my family was a broken home. Both of my parents were alcoholics, and there were a lot of things that, as I was growing up, I had to deal with that. And just to put it briefly, it was a challenging, very challenging childhood, and there was physical abuse and other types of abuse. So that it gave me a lot of challenges. But at the same time, Aaron, I had a lot of really good things in my life, even back then when things were not so great. But I had good friends. I had families that cared about me. I have good memories of certain things about my mom and dad. So I try to concentrate on those things, as I'm now a 63-year-old man, and I'm now an elderly person who is in the latter part of his life. And as I grew up, like I say, it was a broken family, and I had a lot of really good people in my life that helped me. Um, when I was 15, by the time I was 15, I had already started into a drug habit, and back then it was mostly weed. It wasn't really anything harder than that at the beginning. Um, but I ran away from home when I was 15, and was on my own basically for. I mean, I never went back home to live. I did go back home at a certain point to visit my family, but that was some time later. And I ran away, and I ran away from a difficult home life. Uh, I ran away from some unhappiness, um, and I felt that was, it's funny how it happened, Aaron. It wasn't a bad day. It wasn't a day that my parents had an argument. It wasn't a day that I was particularly unhappy. They went shopping, as I recall. It's a long time ago. They went shopping, and I just kind of said, I think I'm going to leave. And I left with the clothes on my back. I think I probably brought a few things with me, but I don't really remember that. But I remember my sister standing at the doorway of my house and saying, Brian, you're never, you're gonna come back. You're not gonna be able to make it out there. And that actually helped me to stay out of the house, because I said, nah, it's not, I'm not doing that. I'm gonna do this on my own. So I fell in with some bad people early on. The most amazing thing, Aaron, is that somehow, back then, I managed to get through high school, and I did well. I was a pretty good student. My friends knew I had a drug problem. I was homeless for about 6 or 7 months between the time I left and the time I became 16. And I made a living by caddying at a place called Ellington Ridge Country Club, and I also worked in a pizzeria for $5 an hour, which back then, a long time ago, was not horrible money. It was under the table. I didn't have taxes taken out. But um, I eventually found a series of, after living in the backseat of cars and in an abandoned building for a while, I eventually found some ways to get by. I slept in the back of a flower shop, not a flower shop, a donut shop called Best Eaten Donuts. I slept on the flour sacks in the back of the donut shop, and I lived off donuts for quite a while. When you're a teenager, that's not a horrible thing. So, but the bad thing was flour sacks sound like they're really fluffy and soft, but they're not. They're like cement. And so I would wake up in the morning and I would smell like donut grease but I'd get my free donuts in the morning because the baker was a good friend of mine. Somewhere in there, I started a little bit of a rock and roll band, and the guy who was the donut baker for the donut shop was actually one of the songwriters in the band. So to make a long story short, I ended up getting through high school. By that time, I was getting into more serious drugs. I wouldn't say I was an addict at that point, but I did rely on drugs to get me through difficult times and to kind of dull the pain of certain things that had gone on in my life, some of the abuse I had, uh, I had endured. But I still didn't get into the really, really bad drugs yet. Um, I moved to Boston. We had our band together, but we were going to go to Boston as a band and see if we could make some money at it. Like every teenage boy thinks they're going to be like Kiss, or I had long hair and an earring in my left ear, and I was a kind of a freaky looking guy at the time. Um, but before we went to Boston, our drummer backed out. Our drummer's name was Gary Smiley, and he backed out. So my friend and I went up to Boston anyway, and we never really made it. But it wasn't all that bad because when I was dating, I started dating this girl who, her name was Margie, and she went to Tufts University. And she was one of the people in my life that, at a critical point in my life, she directed me the right way. She said, Brian, you're a good guitarist and you're a good singer, but you're not going to make it at that. It takes more than being good, and you need breaks and you need to know people. And yeah, I said, yeah, but Margie, my brother is a singer in a band. He cut an album with RCA. And Aaron, interrupt me anytime if you want.
Sure, sure. No, no, no. You're doing great, Brian. Just
Any questions?
keep telling your life. Go right
Yeah.
ahead.
Okay, so that's not all that interesting, but it's an interesting path to how I got to where I am now.
And by the way, I think that a lot of other blind people in the audience can relate to everything that you've already said, and that a lot of blind people have told me very similar stories to yours. So it may not be interesting to you as it is important to the audience. So thank you. So continue, please. Sure.
Oh, all right, thank you for that insight, and I can definitely relate to what you just said. And so Margie said to me this, and she said, um, you gotta have to do something with your life. And I had a pretty bad self-image at that time, and doing drugs definitely didn't help that. And by this point that I met her, I was doing acid, uh, PCP, which back then was in tablet form. Actually, I had started that back when I was in Connecticut before I went to Boston, PCP, and I did some pretty bad stuff. The worst was to come later, but that was pretty bad for a young boy like me to be doing that. But in any event, she said, you really, you're a nice guy, you're a bright guy, you should consider going to college. And I said, Margie, I'm not smart enough to go to college. I'm not really even sure I want to go to college. And she said, look, let's pick a couple of schools. We'll get a couple of applications and let's just see if you get in. So I said, okay, I'll apply to Boston University. I'm not really sure why that was the only school I decided to apply to. I think it was because it was close to Fenway Park, and I'm a Red Sox fan. Unlike some of my very good friends who were Cincinnati fans at the time, and you might know who I'm referring to, maybe not.
Yes, yes.
But, one of my very, very dear friends from high school, Kyle Richmond, who's still a really good, well, one of my best friends even today. We've been friends for a long time. I think you might know him, Aaron. I don't know if you have the same. I think you probably have the same point of view as I do. That he's a real special person, a really awesome guy. Well, okay, I don't
Indeed,
know.
indeed, you are
Well, it's
right. I
always different.
agree.
Like, yeah, I
I
mean, it's
agree.
always okay. Yeah, and I know you probably, you comment that from a different angle, but I know he's very proud of you. I can tell you that because
Thank
we've
you.
talked
Thank you.
quite a bit about you.
But it's
I-
true. It's true because Kyle grew up. Well, Kyle would have been a Cincinnati fan because he lived in Ohio as a young person. So that makes sense that he would have followed the Cincinnati team of that time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and that was back when Pete Rose was still playing, and that was a great team, Cincinnati back then. But anyway, I half-heartedly applied to Boston University. Said, Margie, I'm never going to get in. She said, well, you've got a really good grade record from high school. You've got a lot of A's here. And she saw my transcript that I had a copy sent to her, but they had to send a sealed copy to Boston University. But they gave me a copy that I had requested. And I got in. I got accepted to Boston University. Um, but then I said, "Oh, Margie, I'm not. I mean, I got in, but I don't have the money. I'm broke. I don't really have any good job or anything like that." And she said, "Well, you know what? There's a there's an application for financial assistance here with your acceptance letter. We also got this other letter, and they're inviting you to apply." So I did, and I got a lot of scholarship and work study offers, and I ended up actually being able to go. So I can't say I was really thrilled by it because I kind of looked at high school as this obligation that I got myself through. And honestly, Aaron, it was amazing that I did that because I was homeless some of the time,
Yeah.
and somehow I got to school. And I don't know why. At that point in my life, I kind of think of a running back who, takes the ball and breaks through the line and gets spun around and hit and, spun around and hit and spun around and hit, but he still turns and faces the goal and keeps running toward the goal. And
That's
for
a great
some reason,
analogy. Yeah, yeah. And I think you were a young, you being a young person at that time, you were able to tolerate that to some. I mean, we shouldn't use the word I don't mean it in that sense, because it's not a matter of tolerating it, but you were able to get through it. Have the stamina as a young person. I think at that point you would say you definitely had youth on your side, and you were able to get through it in that sense. And at that time, certainly someone as an older adult would never get through something, could never probably get through something that hard. But when you're young, you don't think about that, so you just had to get through it. So yeah.
you're absolutely right, Aaron. And when I look back, my career has been pretty much the whole career. My meaningful career has been working with children who have hearing impairment,
Right.
actually. And I would look at 15-year-olds that would come to see me for their hearing loss, and I would say, man, that's young. That's a child. But when I was 15, I didn't know it was supposed to be hard to do what I did. I just kind of did it. And you're absolutely right. It's from being 15, I suppose. Everybody was concerned about me around me, but I was like, I got this. This is just, not a problem. It was easy. And in a way, it was easy because I didn't have any of the other challenges that life presented later on in my life. But still, it was, I look at kids now that are 15 and they're children, and that's what I was. So I'm sorry. This is someone who is, of course, contacted me during the middle of this. But so anyway, I went to Boston University. I did a lot of drugs at Boston University. I did, the same things I was doing: weed, acid, and then this drug called ecstasy, which was methyl dioxyamphetamine. I think they still call it ecstasy and Molly. It was great, man. I mean, the drugs that I did, I got to say, I enjoyed doing them. Even though the next day was horrible, and I was burnt out and didn't sleep, and I was just wiped out. I still had fun, and I think that in a weird way, Aaron, and this probably isn't PC to say really, but in a weird way, I think I kind of needed them at the time. I think that they kind
Sure, of course you. No, and I wouldn't. You know what? No, and I'm definitely not PC, and this podcast is not PC. I think in a greater. I think to stress your point, you would never. You are not advocating for someone to use drugs, and you're never advocating for someone to go out and try these drugs. But I think you're absolutely correct. At that time, that was the only way that you could have gotten through it. I think, and I actually think that's what it is. I mean, again, not PC, definitely not something that I would say just to anyone off the street. But I'm not sure in a greater philosophical sense, just being philosophical with you, I don't think you. I think you did need those. I think you did need. Sadly, I think you did need to use those drugs at that time period. Yeah.
Aaron, it was better than the pain I would feel
Well,
I,
then,
I carried a lot of pain with me. I didn't
sure,
realize
sure.
it necessarily.
Yeah.
So when I say I kind of needed it, I'm not. What I'm saying is, it's not good to have needed that. I
Of
guess
course
that
not.
So there's nothing good about doing drugs, and I would never advocate that. And
Absolutely not. But I've spoken to a lot of people who've been through similar situations, and sometimes people just at that point in their life they kind of do need to numb the pain. So yeah. So then you graduated from university, and then what? By the way, what did you study in university? By the way.
I started out I had a journalism minor. I started out as that being my major because I really enjoyed writing,
Mm-hmm.
and I had been published in really small things, but nothing really great or anything like that. And
Mm-hmm.
then in the course of pursuing that degree, I decided that I was going to switch over to literature because I really love literature and I'm a writer. I don't know if you know that, but I have a book that I'm
I
working on now and
I
two
know
other
that.
books. So yeah, so there's a total of 3 books on my brain that I want to do. But I switched over to English literature and got my degree in English literature. Along the way, though, and a lot of drugs were done there. Um, Along the way, 2 things happened. One was I was hired to teach at Milton Academy, as it was a private school, a prestigious private school, and I taught journalism. And it's terrible, but the kids kind of knew my students. I was like the cool teacher, and I did fun things with them, but they also knew when I went home on the weekends that I was up to no good, and they kind of knew when I came back in horrible condition that, and I still was able to do the class. They kind of figured it out.
Yeah, they could sense in their spirit they definitely could sense what you were up to on the weekends. Definitely.
Yeah, they got it, and it unfortunately made me a little cool with them, but I didn't really, I was hiding it from them, I thought, but in retrospect, I'm pretty sure there was one kid. His name was Buddy Vincent. I'll never forget this kid. He came to me one day. He was one of the kind of edgy troublemaker. There were 2 of them that were like that, Peter Farr and Buddy Vincent. They've worked in tandem together, and when one wasn't driving me crazy, the other one was. So Buddy one day came to me and he said, "Brian, I got to show you something." And they would never have done this with any of the other tutors or teachers rather. And he brought me up to his room and he showed me a pot plant hanging upside down in his closet. And I said, "Buddy," I said, "you can't have this if you get rid of it." I said, I didn't see it. I'm not going to say so, but you got to get rid of it." So the funny thing was he did. And then I was obligated to tell the headmaster about it. And it turned out to be this big deal. The police came and there was a field of it back there and they burned it down.
What?
And it was on the news. Yeah, it's really weird.
That's that is darkly hysterical and definitely, but that's just weird, man.
It's
That is
weird. Yeah.
bizarre.
Yeah, it's weird, but that's
Mm-hmm.
what happened. So
Right.
when I was nearly finished with my degree, my nephew, who I really loved like my son, I just adored this kid, and he was being abused by my parents. My sister was living home. Uh, she had a drug problem, and he was being really badly abused, and like really crazy stuff, which I don't want to really necessarily get into, but it was just crazy. And so I told my sister I was going to come and get him. So I came and got him, brought him to Boston, kidnapped him technically. And I contacted the Department of Children and Families and I said, "I've got him over state lines. I've got my sister's approval, and I'm not bringing him back until you investigate the family because he's being abused." So they
Mm-hmm.
did. They went and investigated the family, and their response was that um, there was no stable adult influence in the house and he needed to be removed. So we went into a foster home. And the state of Connecticut kind of said, "Well, he really loves you, Brian, and you're a stable." They didn't know about all the drug stuff. "You're a stable influence. He really loves you, and would you consider adopting him?" So I took him to Florida with me. I actually left college to do this. I don't know if you know that. Maybe Kyle doesn't either. but I left college before I got my degree to take care of him, and we moved to Florida. And I did adopt him. And while I was taking care of him, I went back to Florida Atlantic University, and I actually got my degree from Boston University, finishing one course in Florida, and I got my degree with high honors, magna cum laude. So I don't know how I did it, but I just continued to have these drug issues, but I just kept on doing the right stuff too at the same time. So, I was only 22 at the time. And I tried really, really hard to take care of Jeremy, but I was too young and I just couldn't handle it. And I stayed clean and everything for that time, but it was just a hard thing to do to have a 7-year-old when you're
Yeah.
22. I had him for a year, I did the best I could, but I had to give him up. It was a heartbreaking thing. He begged me not to, and it was just really horrible. We had this time together to say goodbye, and he ended up going back to the foster family he was in before I adopted him. And well, actually, I'm sorry. Let me take that back. I did not adopt him. He was my foster child. So let me
Sure,
back up.
sure. Yeah.
And I got that confused with something that happened later where I
Right,
did
right. Yeah.
adopt. So anyways, but he was, he was like a son to me. And he ended up going back, getting in a lot of trouble. And later on, much later on, he died from a heroin overdose.
Oh,
And yeah, it was bad news.
God.
At that, but there was a whole story around that too, which I'll tell you later. But so in any event, did some weird jobs in Florida for a while as a bartender, made a lot of money as a bartender. I did, what I could do. I ended up having a couple of good jobs. One was in a law firm, and I managed a department in the law firm. I didn't like Florida because there were no seasons there. It was like being on vacation forever and not being able to go home. So I really missed fall and all of the seasons in New England. So another good friend of mine, Brian Gebhardt, who I've known since we were in kindergarten,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
a friend for 58 years now. He said, "Well, listen," I said, "Brian, I got to get out of here, man. I really miss up north." And he said, "Well, come to New York. I have a job in New York. There's a job that you can apply for, and it's kind of something you might like to do, and it's creative." So I moved up and lived with my friend Brian in New Jersey. And the day before we had the interview, Brian and I drank about 3/4 of a bottle of whiskey. I'm
Oh my
sorry to
word.
those. I'm sorry to those who are listening, but I'm being honest. This is an honest.
Yeah.
I told you I was going to be honest. And I ended up going to the interview in terrible shape. And she finally looked at me and she said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." She said, "Would you hire you if you were me?" And I said, "No, not really." And that was the end of that. But then I ended up getting a job in business. I worked for a finance company. And about that time, I started doing cocaine. And I didn't like it at first, actually. But then I kind of got to like it. I worked in that job and met someone who was kind of like the love of my life. And we were together for 14 years. And during that time, um, I did a lot of coke. My partner started to do coke, and that person ended up getting addicted and unfortunately dying. So that was another kind of tough moment in my life. And I had two people that I loved really dearly, and I lost both of them to drugs. And I, to this day, feel somewhat responsible for, actually quite a bit responsible, because I was the one who started this person. And so in any event, so that was tough. And that came later. While I was in New York, I became really heavily into cocaine. By this time, I had gotten a degree at Columbia University. I had left my business job because I hated it, Aaron. It was a horrible job. And I had a staff, and I had some. I mean, it looked good, but it was just a horrible, really horrible job. So I left it, went to Columbia University, um, started out as a speech pathologist student, and then switched over to audiology, which turned out to be uh, the career that I settled in. But during that time, I was still doing a lot of drugs, and it got to the point, Aaron, with me, that even though I graduated and I got a really good job at a really prestigious hospital there, and I was working with kids, my life really spiraled down in terms of drug use. I ended up in rehabs, overdoses, and it was all coke, really. And I had a friend that I used to do it with a lot, and I ended up in all these horrible places and terrible situations. And I was just lucky by the grace of the Lord that I was not put in jail. I mean, I was chased by the police through Central Park, and I had drugs in my pocket, and I managed to, it was like Mission Impossible. I jumped over rocks, rolled across under bushes. It was pretty good. I was pretty adept at moving around like that. So I never got caught technically, but I was close. Um, I had a business there that was successful because I was really into cocaine at the time. I lost the business. I made a lot of money at it, and I spent it all. I ended up having a nervous breakdown at that point. I was in a hospital, a mental hospital, for several weeks. And when I first got there, Aaron, it's hard to explain what it is to have this kind of a breakdown. But when I got there, I actually didn't really know who I was. It was weird. I was put in a room and I was medicated. And then I had to figure out, I was like separated from myself. It was really a weird feeling. And I had to put my life back together. It was a really good rehab place, and they knew what they were doing. And they wouldn't tell me anything, Aaron. They wouldn't tell me anything about my life. They wouldn't tell me anything about, like, I saw people that were out in the courtyard smoking cigarettes, but I was in a locked ward. They wouldn't tell me why they were out there and why I was in there. They didn't tell me why I couldn't have a razor to shave. And they didn't do that because they wanted me to figure it out. And I remember one time, Aaron, I was sitting with, when you're in one of these places, you go, they medicate you. They're trying to figure out how to, back then they didn't really know. It was kind of like trial and error with some of these medications. So they were just playing around and trying to figure out what worked. And I remember, I was starting to figure things out. I was starting to ask questions, and that's what I was supposed to do. That's what they wanted me to do. So I started asking questions. I started figure out what had happened, who I was, my past. I don't remember still a lot of my past, and there's a lot skipped over in this story because of that. But and I remember sitting with the therapist I was working with, and he said, Brian, you're doing really good work. And he said, I just want you to know that there's nothing wrong if you're going to end up working a cash register for the rest of your life. And I'll never forget that. Because when he said that, and I don't know if he did it to get this response out of me or not, but I said, you know what? That's perfectly okay job and everything. But I want to do more than that. That's not what I want to do. And from that point, um, I just really got serious about getting well. Then I moved up to Connecticut. That's when my partner for 14 years ended up dying. I started working at Connecticut Children's Medical Center, and even then, drugs still were a big part of my life. And it wasn't that long ago that I actually successfully got clean. So I worked at Connecticut Children's Medical Center for over 10 years. And during that time, I did a lot of drugs, and it kind of it was spilling over into my work, because I would go to the office. There were a couple of times I went totally high, and they had to send me home, and they dealt with it. They knew what was going on, but they didn't tell me that they knew, but I know they knew. And I would go strung out on cocaine and on the other things that I was doing. And then something actually really amazing happened. And this was probably the most important thing, Aaron, that it was a big turning point in my life, a huge turning point. There was a night where I had done just a ton of drugs. I was living in a fourth floor walk-up studio apartment. It was a nice little apartment. And I just had a ton of drugs, and I just started taking them all. And I remember I was so high, and I remember looking at this one line of coke that I had sitting there, Aaron. And I said to myself, if I do that line right there, I'm going to die. I looked at it and I said that. I said, if I do that line, and I did it, of course, because I was crazy. And then, the next thing that I knew, I was in another place, and it wasn't the drugs either. It was, I'll just tell you exactly what it was because I promised myself I would never embellish this, and the story itself was
You've
just
told me, and I know where it's going. You've told me before, so you can tell me again. But
yeah,
this is really important.
and you'll hear that it's never changed. The what happened was I ended up the first thing I became conscious of was being in this kind of a dull yellow void of nothing, and I said to myself, "Wow, I just died." And I didn't have a voice, but it was kind of audible, and I heard it kind of echo off into the distance, and I was in this nothingness, and I said, "This is really, really not comfortable." And I died, but I don't want to spend the rest of my eternity. If that's what this is, I don't want to be here. So I started kind of willing my way out of it. And the next thing I knew, I popped up into a scene of my life. And it was at a place that I knew well, Beach Pond, which was a place that my family and I used to go. And it was during a weekday. And my mother was there, and she was with a friend of hers who I never saw, but I kind of knew who it was. It was Beverly Gebhardt, or no, not Beverly Gebhardt. I can't think of the name, but it was another friend of ours, of my mom's, and she was there. I'm pretty sure it was her. And I remember seeing myself clearly. I had a little blue bathing suit on with a little fish on it, and I had a white T-shirt, and I had red kid sneakers on with little white toes, and I was probably two or three. And I really had those things. I never remembered it until that. And so I was very clearly in this scene. And I don't know why it was that scene. And it wasn't scene after scene like some people go through or a summary of my life. It was just that one. And then somehow I moved into this next phase. And this is where my life changed. I mean, it was changing through all of this, but I remember being in front of this beautiful, crystalline, shining. It was like clear but beautiful lights and colors coming off of it. And I knew that I was in the presence of something huge, something really big. But I don't know, even to this day, I can't tell you what it was exactly, but I was at the point of crossing over, and I knew that I was at that point. I was aware of it. And we had a very simple exchange with each other. And it wasn't speaking, it was instantaneous conversation. It happened in an instant, but it said to me, and I'm going to say the word said because I don't know how else to describe it, but it was a communication. It was a two-way communication. It was instant. And it said, "What do you choose?" And I said, "What do you mean, what do I choose? We're given a choice." And he said, or it said, "We're all given a choice." And I said, "Not now, for Ben." And I thought at the time that there was a dear friend of mine who really ended up meeting me. And at that time, that was the reason I said no. The next thing that I remember is moving my head back and forth like this, just back and forth. And I kept on turning and seeing a clock that said 4 o'clock in the morning. And when I actually came out of it, I was actually doing that. And I turned, and there was a clock that said 4 o'clock on the wall. And that turned out to be an important time later on. But after that happened, I was like so clear. It was like all the drugs were gone. It was weird. I felt totally clear. And I said, wow, and I started talking to people. I talked to Catholic people. I talked to Jewish people. I talked to all these different Muslims, um, Far Eastern Buddhists, everybody. And I told them the story, and none of them thought it was, not that it wasn't important, but that it was a result of drugs or my imagination, except one Catholic nun. And she said, "Brian, you have actually seen something that other people have seen, but it's a great gift to you." She said, she gave me this book called Life After Life, and it's by somebody Moody, I think. And I read it, and that was the first time I realized what a near-death experience of crossing over was. And that other people, I'm reading the book, Aaron, and I'm like, wow, I mean, this is similar to what happened to me. And what the details weren't exactly the same, but I'm like, wow, this is how I felt. And there were some things that I came out of that with. One of them was that there was something much bigger than us, that there was a God or whatever you want to call it. We we use the term God. It sounds like Easter Bunny in a way, but I use the term God to describe something that I don't really understand. It's just hugely amazing. And that was one of the things I realized. The second thing that was given to me is that knowledge is really important. Knowledge of any kind, we're supposed to learn and learn and learn, whatever. The other thing was that we're connected with this thing that, and that no one goes to hell. There's no hell. This is not very Christian. I am a Christian now, but that's something I just know. We don't really go to hell. Nobody, not even Hitler, nobody. There's some kind of something that happens where we get more chances. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but that was what I was told. And the other thing, Aaron, was that it was known to me that separateness is more of an illusion than a reality, Aaron, that you and I we see each other as separate. We sense each other as separate. But that separateness is more of an illusion than real. We're actually all part of something bigger. And the best way I can describe it is the waves in the ocean. You know, each wave is a distinct wave, but the wave is not separate from the ocean any more than you are separate from me. We're all part of this. You're a wave and I'm a wave. It sounds like, you know, some weird thing that some trippy person would say in the
Not
90s.
at all. You're right. Not at all. It's not weird. It's the truth. You're
We're,
right.
yeah, we're all part of this thing. So that started me on a spiritual journey. But it didn't stop me from taking drugs. And I still took them. I moved to Connecticut, was still very much a drug addict. I was working at Connecticut Children's Medical Center, still doing drugs. And as I said, I was going to work, strung out sometimes. And I ended up getting married to a woman who ended up being, it was a really bad marriage. And just to go real quick, you know, it ended up in a very bad way. And she worked at Connecticut Children's Medical Center. And so I couldn't continue to work there with her. So I left. And I then ended up with a series of jobs that I was never really happy with because my heart was always with children. I really enjoyed working with kids and I'm really good with kids, but I ended up having to leave that. And I continued doing drugs and being a pretty unhappy person. At this point, I was not happy. And then I was starting, I mean, I was at this point pretty close to doing heroin, which was one of the things that I ended up doing, which really became, at that point, I had to stop. I had to do something. But I joined a church. I joined a Christian church, and I thought that that was just the weirdest place, Aaron, because everybody was happy. I'm like, there's something wrong. This is a cult or something, you know.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I didn't trust it, and I was invited by a father of one of my child patients, and I went to the church, and I just said, "Whoa, this is like, you know, not for me. This is a bunch of strange people." But this is while I was working at Connecticut Children's. This guy kept on coming in with his son. And I think it was so he could continue to talk to me because his son didn't really need me all that many times. But anyway, so I ended up going back and I found a home there. And I, I accepted Jesus Christ as an amazing man. I, I, even to this day, you know, I'm a Christian, but I have kind of different views about that. All I can say is that my concept of Jesus being the Son of God is that Jesus was completely connected with this force, which we call God, completely connected. The church got to know me quite well, and they knew I was doing drugs, and they knew that I was starting to do heroin. And the first time I did it, I shot it up. I didn't do it, you know, I didn't snort it or anything. I mean, I was with a guy who I shot it up, and you know, it was the most amazing feeling ever. And I felt like I was just in the arms of God, and um, it was a really hard thing to stop. I ended up getting addicted to it. I would go to work and have to do some at work to get through the day. It became less fun and more of a problem, a big problem. It was where I overdosed. I was in emergency rooms. I ended up being arrested for a DUI. It was the second DUI. I had a mandatory 6-month jail sentence that by Connecticut law, I was mandated to take that. And my attorney got that part nollied. I guess they call it nollied. I was convicted and I was put on 1 year probation, and I had to do counseling and drug rehab. But the part of the mandatory 6 months was nollied because some judge was totally in my corner and my attorney was persuasive enough, but I should have done 6 months in jail. While I was in rehab, I was still using drugs. I kept on popping positive, and my probation officer, I ended up getting elevated to a level 2 probation, which is the next step to going to jail. And I remember this was before I was really taking rehab seriously. And I had left rehab and I wasn't in rehab at this point. And I remember, and I was supposed to be. So this new probation officer, who was really, really, really tough, she said, okay, so you're in rehab, right? And I said, no. And she said, okay, by 5 o'clock tonight, if you're not enrolled in rehab, the police are going to come and take you to jail. They're just going to come and take you. By this time, I had adopted a child. By the miracle of the Lord, I got backgrounded, and I don't know how this never came up. This was before I was arrested when I adopted him, but I had all these drug things and rehabs and everything else before that. And they never found out about it. I ended up adopting Trevon, who's my son. I think you met, did you meet, I think we were there.
I did. I met him once when I was a boy. It was the time where I was 12. I only met him once.
Yeah, you were pretty young.
I was 12. No, I was around 12. But I do know what you're talking about. Yeah, no, I don't know how. If you say that, if anyone says that they want to adopt a child, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you can get, I don't know how you can get through the system with a like talking about it third person from someone else's perspective. I don't know how anyone could get through this system if they have a background like yours, Brian. I don't know how that
Well,
doesn't come up. Like,
I
what?
I believe it was God.
Yeah,
I remember, I wanted to have a son, and
right.
a series of things just led to my not having one. And I was going to adopt. I remember when I started this whole thing. I'm sorry, this is a little bit of a hodgepodge, and it's not quite exactly
It's
in context.
beautiful. Keep going. You're doing beautifully. Keep going.
But I wanted a son. I wanted to have a kid in my life, and because I really, really love children, and your mom and dad had a big part of this because and I don't know if
Absolutely.
you even, you may know this. I don't know if you know the whole thing, but um, I wanted to adopt. I figured a boy, and I was going to get a boy from Guatemala, and it was through uh, Christian Charities at the time was the organization, and it started running into money, and it was tens of thousands of dollars, and I would have to go live there for a while with the kid, and I might not get him in the end, and I could spend all this money, and the laws weren't regulated in Guatemala, and they could take you for your money and not give you the child. So I said, nah. And at that point, I came down to visit your mom and dad, and I was saying, because they knew I was trying to adopt a boy, and I told them what happened.
What year? This year that we're talking about now. What year are you referring to at this moment in the story?
That's what year it was. I don't know. It was probably I'd come up to Connecticut Children's in 2000, rather 2002. So this was probably around 2004, 2005, 2006.
Okay.
Maybe.
All right. So I was around. Okay. Right.
Does that make sense with the age that you recall that you were? Might have been a little later, honestly, but
No, it might have been a little. No, wait.
or early. It could have been early.
2004. It could have been around that year. Could have been 2004. Yeah. No, 13. No, that does sound like around. We're gonna go with. Let's go with 2004. That sounds close enough. Yeah.
I think that sounds about right.
Yeah.
And I remember Jill, your mom, said,
Mm.
"Oh, Brian, if you want a kid bad enough, you're going to find a way." And then your father said, Brian, I've never known you to set your mind on something that you didn't accomplish.
Right.
You're going to get a kid. And I said, nah, I don't think so. It was kind of like how I was with Margie way back in the Boston University days. I didn't think it was possible. So I said, you know what? I heard about the Big Brother program. I think I'm just going to be a Big Brother. So I applied for the Big Brother program. That was my first backgrounding that I got through. They didn't find anything about my past. So anyway, it's the weirdest thing, Aaron, but
No, it's because it's a very simple answer. It's God.
it,
That's the
it,
that's the only answer that makes sense to me. It would have to be God would. I mean, God would have to help you, or else they would have found out. So God would have to help you get through that one. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it was God, and we're 15 minutes away from the hour, so I'm gonna try to just make this a little quicker. I became a big brother. My son, who was not my son at the time, he asked me to be his foster father. I said no. He started crying. And when I saw him cry, I said, okay, but I was afraid to do that because I figured I would. And I said, Trevon, I don't know what's going to happen. His name is Trevon, but I'll get fingerprinted and we'll start the process. So I really thought that this was going to be a more extensive backgrounding and they would figure everything out, but they didn't. So again, God, and so the adoption went through. He was my foster child at 10. His mother fought it tooth and nail, the state, and they were really doing a big backgrounding on me. So the adoption wasn't final until he was 14. But the greatest thing that I ever experienced, and still can say that the greatest thing of my life was having the privilege of raising Trevon. He ended up doing really well. I got him in private school. He did very well, and he went to a good school. Now he's a businessman in Georgia. So, it's was an amazing experience. And I just spoke to him yesterday. But now I want to fast forward, Aaron, to how the heck am I in Medellin, Colombia, the cocaine capital of the world, the home of Pablo Escobar. I mean, this is the real deal here, and it's still the cocaine capital of the world. So why am I here? What happened was I moved away from the church that I had been in. They had gotten me clean, actually. It was during that time when I was with that first church, the first Christian church I was with. And I ended up getting off of heroin. And I slipped up a little bit here and there, but basically that was pretty much the end of that, with the exception of still smoking weed, um, with some consistency. But in any event, I ended up joining this new church called the Emmanuel Baptist Church in Newington, Connecticut. And I ended up bringing a friend of mine there, a very dear friend of mine. Her name is Marilyn Hurst, just a wonderful lady. And she became a Christian. I was a Christian. I had been baptized. She got baptized. And here's the thing, Aaron. This is probably the biggest thing. This is the biggest spiritual thing, actually, that ever happened to me. I was walking out of the church one day, Emmanuel Baptist. I had been drawn to that church. We'll just leave it at that. I was walking out one day and I felt this feeling was really strong. And I said, Marilyn, I think I'm being called by the Lord to do something. I stopped dead in my tracks and she said, what do you think it is? And I said, I don't know. And she said, maybe you're supposed to be a pastor. I said, Marilyn, I'm like, I'm too old to go back and be a pastor. You have to go to school for that. So then we kind of, let it go. And about, I don't know, a few months later, I became aware in a very strange way. It was through Cambly, actually. This guy looked me up, took a 5-minute trial with me, because Cambly is this place you teach online. I still do it. And he said, listen, I looked up your background. I don't know you, but I'm going to give you the name of a kid. And I'm going to, so anyway, he gave me the name of this kid. He said, this kid is a Venezuelan. He's in trouble. So I got the telephone number, the name. I called him up. I got a picture of him. And he was an 18-year-old kid who was prostituting. He was trying to take care of his family in Venezuela. Venezuela's fallen apart. It's a really dangerous country and they're in anarchy at this point. So I felt bad for him. So I sent him money. And then I realized that probably wasn't the best thing to do because I didn't know him well and it could be a scam. So I was in my prayer group at Emmanuel Baptist Church and I said, listen, I want to pray for this kid that is in trouble. And we prayed. And then one of the guys in the group said, you know what, Brian, he said, I think I know somebody in Guatemala. I think there's a missionary down there that, let me see if I can contact this guy. So we contacted this man, Mark Garrison, who's the pastor down here. And I ended up talking to Mark. I said, Mark, I've actually got a picture of this kid, the name and telephone number. So he said, okay. He said, I'll reach out to him. We didn't know each other, Mark and I. Said, I'll reach out to him. So then a few days later, Mark calls me back and he says, I talked to him. I don't think I think he's kind of like not really interested. I think he was probably wanting your money, but I left the door open for him to come to the mission. And he said, listen, Brian, look, he said, we've been looking, do you know anyone, you say that you, in the course of us talking, you said that you teach international English on this company. He said, do you know anybody who's in Colombia who teaches with this company that might be interested in helping us, because we need a teacher. We've been praying for a teacher for 10 years to teach the Venezuelan refugees English and the poor Colombians English. So when they started praying for an English teacher, Venezuela was still a wealthy country, but Colombia was a third world country at the time. It's now a developing country. So I said, Mark, you know what? It's me. He goes, what do you mean? I said, Mark, I'm supposed to be the teacher there. He said, what are you talking about? I said, Mark, I've been called to do something by the Lord. And as soon as you said that, I knew this is what I'm supposed to do. So he said, well, no. He said, well, let's just chill with that, because that's not why I said it. And I don't want you to come here because you think I'm trying to get you to come here. Let's just pray on it for a couple of weeks and then we'll get back to each other. So we did. And I just knew this is where I was supposed to be. So I flew down here in June earlier this year to do a survey trip. My church sort of helped me with that. And I came down, Aaron, and I saw people here that were so poor and so on the streets, sleeping on the sidewalk, filthy, like much worse than anything I had ever seen in the United States for homeless people. And I lived in New York City for 20 years. So, I literally came home the first or second day I got on with Marilyn, and I cried. It was just so heartbreaking. I literally sobbed, and I said, I don't know what to do, Marilyn. There's so many people here and so much need. But then I came back to the States and I couldn't get it off my mind. And I said, I have to go down there. I'm going to need to go down there and teach. And just to make a long story short, I'm here. Just started my first class. I just did my second class on Wednesday. I came down here on November 15th, exact day the Lord told me to come down here. And there have been just one thing after another of the Lord pitching in and helping and giving me money when I really needed it, where it came from nowhere. And so I'm here and I'm living in a dangerous city, but I feel the Lord's going to protect me. I'm in, ironically, the drug capital of the world, but I'm clean. I've been clean for quite a while now, not even weed, and I was smoking weed up to the point that I came down here, but I haven't even done that. I am clean from everything, and I have no desire to do it anymore. So the Lord not only brought me here to help the people here, but he brought me here so that people here could help me. And the way that they help me is because I have a real heart for them and they need so much help. And I'm just so grateful that a simple, regular person like me could be, because of the grace of the Lord, able to do something extraordinary. And it's not me, I am ordinary, but we serve an extraordinary Lord. We serve an extraordinary God, and through ordinary people, really extraordinary things can happen. And so we are hoping to open a school. That's where we think this is heading. We'll end up at some point with a school. We want to get up to about 650 students, 700 students. And at that point, when we have no room to put them anywhere, we'll start looking for a building. We want it to be free for the students that come, sponsored by missionaries, churches throughout the world. That's the goal. And so I'm here for probably the rest of my life, Aaron. I have no indication of ever going back anywhere. It's going to take years to do what we want to do. And that is it. I just talked for an hour.
You basically, you absolutely, you did. I mean, you're just the way that you tell your timing is perfect. We have 5 minutes, and I have a couple statements that I want to make to you. Just the way you tell your story is so tangible for me as a blind person, and it's so easy for me to relate to everything you said. I mean, it's your story is great. Your story is hard to listen to. Your story is just it's just very overwhelmingly relatable and overwhelmingly important for others to learn from you. And I think, by the way, don't sell yourself short. I think you would be a magnificent pastor, or a magnificent leader in a congregation setting. But I also think you're a magnificent teacher, and just truly, just the way you explain your whole, relationship with God, it all made sense. I think my interpretation of it, it's just my own opinion. After all, this is an opinion channel and an
Mhm.
opinion podcast. I think God was looking out for you the moment you were born, and said this Brian kid is gonna have a hard life, but you're gonna be able to affect people in a really positive way.
Yeah.
So I think that's the meaning of life. I think that's why. That's the why. I'm sure that I just have to ask you.
Mhm.
A lot of people, a lot of blind people and people with disabilities struggle with the meaning of life and understanding, why me? Why do I have to be blind? I've struggled with it off and on, not so much now, but everybody does. So, what if you were to speak to all, and you can't, but if you were to speak to the audience, and give them some words of wisdom about life, and overcoming things, which is what you've done. What would you say to them as far as understanding life, and overcoming? Maybe in this case, maybe a 2 to 4 sentence answer.
Okay. I'll try to be quick, but I also want to say something about you,
Sure.
Aaron, before we end
Of
this.
course.
I would say, based on my own experience, when I was called to do this, my whole life made sense, actually. And I think you're exactly right. I think that God puts us through trials, and I think they're hard to understand. And at the time they're happening, they're really just like, why me? Why? And I think that at a certain point, if you just keep pushing and you just keep, like, that running back who just keeps on getting spun around, but still ends up going toward the goal line, somehow he figures out which way to go every time. That's a real art. And as long as we keep doing that, we're going to be okay. And I really want to have a couple of minutes left here. And I really don't want to end this without saying something about you. I have known you since you were born.
Right.
I have watched you grow. Your dad and I had a lot of talks and things about you. You went through some really, really difficult times, and I'm not going to be so
Sure.
specific because it's personal, but you are a model of someone who has overcome, has persevered. And Aaron, I want to take this minute to publicly say to you that you are an inspiration to me. And whoever is listening to this, listen to Aaron, because, this is an amazing guy. And I just want to say that, Aaron. I'm really proud of you.
I'm really pleased to hear it. I accept that, and thank. I'm really proud of you too. Just hearing your story, getting to the end of it. If anyone was telling me this story, and they're doing the great things you're doing, I would say, wow, I'm proud of you. That's a really, you too have overcome, and now, basically, God is helping you along the way, and I agree with you. But of course, I end every episode just similar way to how I started. If you, and I know you're going to love this, if you can ask me only one question to really make me sweat, to really see if I'm worth my salt as a podcaster, what do you really want to ask me?
This is really difficult, but I'm going to ask it.
Oh, I
Okay.
got, I got this. I got this.
What was your darkest time? What was the biggest moment in your life where you said, where you really felt like you weren't going to be able to do it, maybe, or it was just
Yeah.
a big, 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 maybe bigger than you could handle, and here you are now
Well,
with a
I,
successful
I can
podcast.
tell you, and Kyle will agree. It was getting through university and dealing with the society and dealing with people, but mostly it was getting through the university. That was my thing. Um, I think that's what I can say. I think probably my parents, both Jill and Kyle, will say many more different things than that. But for me, my thing that I've had to overcome, and I'm stronger because of it, was the university. But you know, I think that would be it, you know. And then I got into the education like you did, the teaching, and then the podcasting came along later. But so Brian, if someone and you don't have to give out this info if you don't want to, of course, but if someone like wants to get in touch with you, or they want to get in touch with your church, your mission there, how is there a way for the public to do that? How would they go about doing that?
The only way to do that, and I invite people to as well to do this, is you can contact me on my email. I am on Facebook, but I don't take new people. I only take friends of friends. Are you my friend though? Did you friend me on Facebook?
We must be. I hope so. I forget.
Okay, because then that would be the way. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
any of the people that are listening to you, if they're friends of yours, I mean, I could open up my Facebook page, then you could see everything that I'm doing. It's all on there. But
Mm-hmm.
contact me at Brian_Knox at rocketmail.com. Brian_Knox at rocketmail.com. And I'll get you whatever you want to know about me, or I can get you onto my Facebook page. And that's where everything is. The church that I am a missionary at, a voluntary missionary, is Iglesia Bautista Amistad Christos, which is basically
Let's go with, if they have questions for you, they can email you.
email me. Yeah,
Can you spell that email for the blind listeners? By the way, can you spell it?
sure. It's B as in Brian, it's my Knox, my name, BRIAN_KNOX at ROCKETMAIL.com. Brian_Knox at rocketmail.com.
I think that's an excellent place to end. Well, of course, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. God bless you. Keep up your great work down there. Hang in there. Stay safe. And of course, I'm sure, as you know, you can always, for more inspiration, since you're inspired, since you love what we do here at Aaron's Opinion, you can listen to a new episode every Thursday, 12 o'clock. So
All right, I will do that actually. Absolutely.
So thank you so much, and just keep up your great work. And to all the guests from around the world, everybody listening, stay safe out there. I'm sure you all learned a tremendous amount from this episode. Could not have gone better. Stay safe out there. As I usually say in the outro, or I'll say it actually here, thanks so much, everybody. As I like to say, help one person today, help 1 million people tomorrow.